Voskhod-1 wasn't just a spaceflight, it was a high-stakes political gamble wrapped in scientific ambition and executed with a level of improvisation that still boggles the minds of space historians. Launched on October 12, 1964, Voskhod-1 broke records that many thought were decades away: the first spacecraft to carry more than one person into orbit, the first flight without spacesuits, and the first mission to feature a civilian aboard. Yet few today grasp how recklessly close this triumph came to disaster, or how deeply it reshaped the Cold War narrative and the race to dominate the cosmos. Picture this: 3 men crammed inside a capsule barely built for one, strapped into a modified Vostok spacecraft, stripped of ejection seats and life-saving suits, all so that the Soviet Union could make a public spectacle of superiority just days before a major political transition. Inside were Vladimir Komarov, the seasoned test pilot, Konstantin Feoktistov, the civilian engineer whose mathematical brilliance earned him a seat despite zero flight training, and Boris Yegorov, a medical doctor eager to study the impact of weightlessness on the human body. Their mission was short, just over 24 hours, but the risks they faced were monumental. Why would the USSR choose to send 3 people into orbit without basic survival gear? The answer unveils a tangled story of political imagemaking, technological bluffing, and last-minute engineering miracles. At a time when American astronauts were still flying solo and NASA's Gemini program was months from liftoff, the Soviets needed a dazzling spectacle. They wanted to prove they weren't just keeping pace, they were outpacing the West. The Voskhod program, hastily born from the bones of the Vostok capsule, became their showpiece, despite its glaring limitations. And therein lies the question: how did a jury-rigged spacecraft with no escape system, no suits, and cramped conditions avoid catastrophe, and what lessons did it leave for the future of human spaceflight? The Voskhod capsule was so tight that the 3 cosmonauts had to remain motionless throughout the flight. There was no space to move, no visibility through a window, and no redundancy built into the systems. Komarov's command console was barely within reach. Feoktistov had difficulty using the equipment due to its awkward positioning. And unlike American missions where astronauts wore full pressure suits and carried ejection systems, Voskhod-1 was built on a gamble that nothing would go wrong. Because if it did, there was no way out. Despite these hurdles, the mission launched successfully and made headlines worldwide. It wasn't science that drove Voskhod, it was propaganda. The Soviet Union needed to make noise, and they did. But the real story goes far deeper than newspaper clippings and televised celebrations. Behind the veneer of Soviet achievement were rough edges, technical compromises, political motivations, and the human courage behind the facade. Voskhod-1's true legacy lies in what it forced engineers to confront: that space travel, no matter how dazzling, must bow to safety and reason, or risk the lives of those who dare to go beyond Earth's cradle. In 1964, the Soviet Union stunned the world with Voskhod-1, the first spacecraft to carry multiple crew members into orbit. But what made Voskhod-1 truly remarkable wasn't just its record-breaking crew of 3, it was how radically it bent the rules of safe spaceflight. The capsule was a heavily modified version of the earlier Vostok design, originally meant for 1 cosmonaut. To fit 3, engineers stripped out ejection seats and ditched spacesuits entirely, forcing the crew to fly in street clothes. Space inside was so cramped that movement was nearly impossible, and life support systems had no backup. Yet, despite these minimalist conditions, the spacecraft orbited Earth successfully for 24 hours. It was a triumph of Soviet engineering, or a high-stakes gamble dressed as progress. Voskhod may first have demonstrated bold innovation, but it also exposed the thin margin between ambition and disaster in early spaceflight. The Voskhod-1 launch vehicle was essentially a modified R-7 intercontinental ballistic missile, the same powerful foundation that had launched Sputnik and Vostok. Known officially as the 11A-57 booster, this rocket was tweaked to accommodate the larger Voskhod capsule and ensure the heavier, 3-man payload reached orbit. To do this, engineers added a new payload shroud and slightly upgraded performance systems. It retained the same basic architecture, a central core stage surrounded by 4 liquid-fueled strap-on boosters, all firing simultaneously to produce over 900,000 pounds of thrust. Despite its Cold War roots, the launch vehicle was remarkably reliable and elegant in its simplicity. On October 12, 1964, it roared to life at Baikonur Cosmodrome, lifting Voskhod-1 into orbit in under 10 minutes. The mission marked not just a technological milestone, but also a triumph of repurposed military hardware aimed at beating the Americans in the space race. Vladimir Komarov was a Soviet aerospace engineer, test pilot, and cosmonaut whose legacy is etched into the history of space exploration and tragedy. Born in Moscow in 1927, Komarov's fascination with aviation began early. He entered flight school at just 15, and by 1949, he was a commissioned pilot in the Soviet Air Force. His technical brilliance and calm demeanor earned him a place among the first group of Soviet cosmonauts. Komarov commanded Voskhod-1 in 1964, the first spaceflight to carry more than one crew member. But it was his second mission, Soyuz-1, that made him a symbol of sacrifice. Despite knowing the spacecraft had serious design flaws, Komarov chose to fly partly to spare his friend Yuri Gagarin from the same fate. On April 24, 1967, after multiple system failures and a parachute malfunction during re-entry, Soyuz-1 crashed, making Komarov the first human to die during a spaceflight. His final moments were reportedly calm and composed, though some accounts suggest he knew the end was near. Komarov was posthumously honored as a hero of the Soviet Union, and his ashes were interred at the Kremlin Wall necropolis. His story remains a haunting reminder of the risks pioneers take in pushing the boundaries of human achievement. Konstantin Feoktistov was a Soviet engineer and cosmonaut whose life reads like a Cold War epic. Born in 1926 in Voronezh, Russia, his early years were shaped by World War II. At just 16, he served as a scout for the Soviet Army, was captured by the Nazis, shot through the neck, and miraculously survived by feigning death. After the war, Feoktistov pursued engineering at Bauman Moscow Higher Technical School and earned a doctorate in physics. He became a key figure in the Soviet space program, helping design the Sputnik, Vostok, Voskhod, and Soyuz spacecraft. In 1964, he flew aboard Voskhod-1, the first spacecraft to carry 3 people. Notably, Feoktistov was the first civilian in space and the only Soviet cosmonaut who was not a member of the Communist Party. His flight lasted just over 24 hours, during which he conducted scientific experiments and observations. Afterward, medical issues grounded him from future missions, but he continued shaping Soviet spaceflight from the ground. He played a pivotal role in designing the Salyut and Mir space stations. Feoktistov's legacy is honored with a lunar crater named after him, and his story stands as a testament to resilience, intellect, and the human drive to explore beyond Earth. Boris Yegorov was a Soviet physician and cosmonaut who made history as the first practicing medical doctor in space. Born in Moscow in 1937, he came from a family steeped in medicine. His father was a renowned heart surgeon, and his mother an ophthalmologist. Yegorov followed in their footsteps, earning his medical degree in 1961 with a specialization in balance disorders, a field crucial to understanding the effects of spaceflight on the human body. In 1964, Yegorov joined the crew of Voskhod-1, the first spacecraft to carry more than one person. Alongside Vladimir Komarov and Konstantin Feoktistov, he conducted biomedical experiments during the flight, studying how weightlessness, radiation, and confinement affected human physiology. His inclusion was strategic. Soviet planners wanted real-time medical data from space, and Yegorov's expertise made him the ideal candidate. After the mission, he returned to medical research and academia, contributing to the development of space medicine and training future cosmonauts. He was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union and continued shaping Soviet spaceflight from behind the scenes. Yegorov passed away in 1994, but his legacy lives on in the field of aerospace medicine and even in the stars, with asteroid 8450 Yegorov named in his honor. Voskhod-1 launched on October 12, 1964, from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, making history as the first crewed spaceflight to carry more than one person. The Soviet Union squeezed 3 cosmonauts, Vladimir Komarov, Konstantin Feoktistov, and Boris Yegorov, into a capsule originally designed for one. Within 8 minutes and 43 seconds, Voskhod-1 reached orbit, entering a path between 178 and 408 kilometers above Earth. Once in orbit, Voskhod-1 became a symbol of Soviet daring and ingenuity. The spacecraft settled into a low Earth orbit ranging from 178 to 336 kilometers in altitude, with an inclination of 64.7 degrees, completing one revolution every 89.6 minutes. Over the course of 16 orbits, the crew Vladimir Komarov, Konstantin Feoktistov, and Boris Yegorov conducted a series of biomedical and engineering experiments, including fluid dynamics in microgravity and Earth observation photography. Despite the cramped conditions and lack of spacesuits, the cosmonauts remained composed. Feoktistov monitored spacecraft systems, Yegorov collected physiological data, and Komarov ensured mission stability. The flight also had televised broadcasts and a live conversation with Premier Khrushchev, who was ousted from power during the mission. The re-entry of Voskhod-1 on October 13, 1964, was a daring finale to an already risky mission. Unlike the earlier Vostok flights, where cosmonauts ejected and parachuted separately, the Voskhod crew Vladimir Komarov, Konstantin Feoktistov, and Boris Yegorov remained inside the capsule for a hard surface landing. To soften impact, engineers added drogue parachutes and a solid-fuel retrorocket that fired just before touchdown. The descent module made a ballistic re-entry, relying on its offset center of gravity to orient correctly without active controls. The retrorocket, suspended from the parachute lines, ignited moments before landing, reducing the final impact force. Still, the landing was jarring. Feoktistov later joked that sparks were flying from our eyes. After touchdown, the capsule rolled, leaving the crew hanging upside down in their harnesses. Voskhod-1 was a daring showcase of Soviet ambition, designed to outpace the US in the space race, but it came with serious risks. Launched on October 12, 1964, its primary goal was to demonstrate that a multi-person crew could operate safely in orbit. The mission packed 3 cosmonauts, Vladimir Komarov, Konstantin Feoktistov, and Boris Yegorov, into a capsule originally built for one. This bold move allowed the USSR to beat NASA's Gemini program to multi-crewed flight, scoring a major propaganda win. Mission goals: prove multi-crewed spaceflight was possible, setting the stage for future collaborative missions. Conduct biomedical research with Yegorov, the first physician in space, monitoring human physiology in microgravity. Test spacecraft modifications, including a retrorocket for soft landings and removal of the ejection seat. Showcase interdisciplinary teamwork, with a pilot, engineer, and doctor working together in orbit. Major problems: no spacesuits. To fit 3 people, suits were omitted. Any cabin depressurization would have been fatal. No launch escape system. If the rocket failed during the first few minutes, the crew had no way to survive. Cramped conditions. Cosmonauts had to diet to fit inside, and Feoktistov had to crane his neck to use the control panel. Political interference. Crew selection was influenced by internal Soviet politics, not just merit or training. Minimal training. The crew received only a few months of preparation, far less than typical for space missions. Accomplishments: first multi-person spaceflight, beating the US to the milestone. First civilian and first physician in space, expanding the profile of cosmonauts beyond military pilots. First crewed ground landing. The capsule touched down with the crew inside, cushioned by a retrorocket. Set altitude record, reached 336 kilometers, the highest for a crewed mission at the time. Symbolic impact. The mission coincided with Khrushchev's political downfall, adding drama to its legacy. Despite being dubbed a space circus by insiders, Voskhod-1 was a triumph of Cold War showmanship and engineering improvisation. It paved the way for Voskhod-2 and the first spacewalk, while highlighting the razor-thin line between innovation and danger. Voskhod-1 wasn't just a mission, it was a statement. In just over 24 hours, the Soviet Union redefined what was possible in human spaceflight, launching the first multi-person crew into orbit and returning them safely to Earth. Despite the cramped capsule, lack of spacesuits, and political drama unfolding back home, Komarov, Feoktistov, and Yegorov proved that courage and innovation could overcome immense risk. This flight marked the debut of a physician and a civilian in space, set a new altitude record, and introduced the first crewed ground landing. But it also exposed the razor-thin margin between triumph and catastrophe. Voskhod-1 was a gamble, and it paid off, shaping the future of Soviet space exploration and setting the stage for even bolder missions to come. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more deep dives into space history.